Back to Cheche, live on Citizen TV. We'll all be paying close attention to the budget presentation tomorrow afternoon to see whether it offers any relief. Most of us are feeling the pain of the rising cost of living. If you're not, please let us know on SMS number 22422 or on Twitter using the hashtag Cheche. So I'll remind you who our guests are: Stephen Mutoro, the Secretary General of the Consumer Federation of Kenya, COFEC, and we now have with us James Chikwati, the Director of the Interregion Economic Network. And so, James, I'll give you an opportunity to state your position on this issue, because earlier in the program, Stephen, shared his position as COFEC, that they were optimistic about, Jubilee Manifesto promises, chiefly, bringing down the cost of living. And then we've gone on to talk about various things, the number of helicopters per person in Kenya. So why is this cost of living measurement important? You're an economist. What does it do for us?
Well, the cost of living is important because it helps somebody to plan their life. It also helps an employer to be able to calibrate the kind of package that they need to offer in return for the services they get from the employee. And it also helps with, let's say, the foreigners who want to come and maybe work in Kenya, especially those who live in furnished apartments. You have to do the calculations well in advance in terms of what it will cost you to survive in a month in, let's say, Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, or in a rural place. So it becomes a very important measure for the individual and also for employers and also for companies as well. Yeah.
Mr. Mutoro told us earlier about, we're looking at things like cost of health, cost of transportation, cost of health, not healthcare, electricity. What factors, as an economist, do we take into consideration when we're computing the cost of living?
Well, there's what we'll call the basic utility. How much does it cost you, to survive? Just, food is important because it's like the petrol in the car. But you notice these days we are so much attached to other utilities that initially in our lives we never used to use, like you've given the example of electricity. So you'll get that if the cost of those utilities, go up, then it impacts on your disposable income, because it means you have to pay for the water, for the electricity, and then your daily bread also goes up. And now you compare that with the income you get from your monthly salary. So if you get that your salary is stuck at a certain figure, but the cost of these utilities keep going up, that's why we talk about the cost of living. But in my view, I would look at the cost of living also in terms of options available. So if we are looking at the Kenyan situation, we'd say that the mere fact that we've increased our choices, our options to choose from different, suppliers and goods, one can argue that the cost of living is getting better because we are getting a wider menu from which we can choose from.
Although, do you mean a wider menu of electricity, providers?
Yes, you notice now there's solar. There are people peddling solar, off-grid energy supply. There's then the main grid energy supply. So the options are going wider compared to initially.
How many people can afford solar, though?
Then I'm talking about in general terms.
Okay.
Initially all were on kerosene. Now the options are going beyond kerosene, right? So when we offer Kenyans a wider menu of where they can make choices, we are actually improving their ability to have a better cost of living. But we have to go back to my initial point that if we are not able to also, reward them enough in terms of the salary they get, then the options may not really give them the positive aspect that we expect. So I think we can look at it in terms of, yes, it's improving, because I looked at the question of 5 years ago and today.
James, are you suggesting that if, for example, we had a wider variety of foods to choose from, then we would not be complaining of a rising cost of living? Like if, for example, we would say, let's now use soil to make ugali. then the price of maize flour would not be high.
Actually, don't talk about the soil. Like, let's say if you can eat rice, if you can eat ugali, if you can have potatoes. I mean, if you have a wider menu, you notice that the foods will be competing amongst themselves and the prices will start going down.
I think the economist is talking like Marie Antoinette. If there's no bread, why can't they eat cake?
No. The point is that if you look at the Kenyan situation, for instance, when we talk about famine or hunger, in most cases it will be lack of maize. Although now, of course, we are widening the menu.
Even though there are other things to eat.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not about lack of bread. It's about if we widen our menu of what people can choose from, so that it's not always ugali. You know, so rice is an option. When the foods start competing, then you notice that the prices
who says rice is cheaper than maize flour?
And I wanted to jump in. I was listening to James very clearly. I thought he would talk about, you know, the problem in this country is actually not the level of salary. It's not the level of income, but the cost, I mean, what you can be able to do with that income, whether you're employed or self-employed. And I think the emphasis in this country has been a wrong one. Where you talk about, let's have even more salaries. Look at the takeaway our honorable members of parliament will be given tomorrow. And ask yourself, now, when we increase the wage bill, and then Wanjiku has to use the same amount to buy the same loaf of bread, and the same amount, you know, I mean, there's a question, I mean, there's a problem here. So for me, the emphasis would have been, talk about food, talk about even diversity. I mean, this was a cultural issue. I was born somewhere in the part of this country where stable food probably is X. Now, how are you going to change my diet? It takes time. It's also a cultural issue. I think we need to look at basic issues. What went wrong? I think what went wrong is that somewhere along the line, either middlemen or cartels made it too costly for a higher segment of society to afford certain things. So let's not even be too theoretical on some of these things. Basic things.
Yeah, I think we are agreeing on the point that, you know, when you widen the menu, you know, when you talked about diversity, we are in agreement on that. I think what went wrong, in my view, is the perception that the government is the one that brings development. When you position the government as the galvanizer, you know, you're having a scenario where the politician then claims he has to be paid more to showcase that they deliver, right? And then they ignore about the subject or the citizen, who should be actually the person who is the engine of that development. You know, it's in a similar fashion like when you have a company, and you know, a company galvanizes talent, like here in Citizen. This talent then gives products that we all enjoy when we watch Citizen. So the government is supposed to be a galvanizer of this talent. But you notice that the way we positioned it is that it's the politician who brings development. So then the politician puts all these placards, all their names saying, "I brought the road," when in essence we should be talking about the citizen having brought that road. If you position it in that manner, you'll notice that every citizen will be happy to showcase the talent they can give out there. So for me, in terms of now going back to the point, because the subject is cost of living, really is that when we have a scenario where then the government suffocates my ability to bring my talent, so I have more income. You know, wage bill is a political point where somebody calibrates numbers. But here we're talking about productivity. My individual productivity, which should be rewarded by the market. I've produced more potatoes, so I've earned more money for my potatoes. I've swept a longer road, so I've been paid for that. Then I should be able to afford all these foods that we're talking about,
regardless of whether the price goes up.
Yes, but you know, it's been suffocated, whereby it's the politician now who purports to be the one driving development, when in essence is literally taking all the little tax that we pay and putting it in,
you brought politics into it,
prioritize other things.
And it's reflected in our viewer comments, and then I'll bring that question back to you. So this is what our viewers are saying. Hi Cheche, let's be fair to ourselves about the cost of living. Now there is no rain, sugarcane has dried up or slow growth, increase in price of sugar, few people grow sukuma and cabbages, high prices, increase in transportation cost of oil and the high seas, expensive constitution. For example, more commissioners, many MPs don't touch on infrastructure because we need dams for water, roads, cheap and faster rail, electricity. Instead, give us solutions. That's Eliud in Nairobi. My name is Maina. I support the current government with all the projects it's doing, but with all the good things, the high cost of living is really a threat to common citizen. It's a hand-to-mouth kind of survival. Good morning, Cheche. The cost of living is way higher than it was 5 years ago. And I agree with Charles, who reminisces of the sitting DP vowing that no Kenyan will die of hunger. Unfortunately, natural calamities that are perennial, like famine in Kenya, can be mitiged against. We need change, and you see the politics coming in. Kenyans are getting stronger. I think this is sarcasm here. Kenyans are getting stronger. 20 years ago, it took 2 people to carry groceries worth 1,000 shillings. Today, a 5-year-old can carry the same. And that goes back to your question, what could 100 shillings or 1,000 shillings do 5 years ago? What does it do now? But you see the politics coming in. You see that, you know, there are people who think the current government has failed to reduce the cost of living, and so therefore we need to change. And there are those who agree with what you were saying earlier, Mr. Mutoro, which is that, you know, there's a long-term vision. We're feeling some pain in trying to achieve that vision. So when we come to the question of the cost of living, can it be objective?
I think in my view it can be objective, but I'd like just to interject on the point that on the issue of the long-term thinking. I still think there's a problem with the perception that there's a good long-term plan, because even if you look at infrastructure, the plans that we hear being discussed are all about bringing goods into the country. If you're talking about the railway line, it's about goods coming in. Even if it's inland port, it's about goods coming in. You know, we're not seeing a conversation that is talking about infrastructure to get goods out. And you know, if you want to reduce the cost of living, we go back to the point of productivity. We need to produce so that we get rewarded for our production. But if all you do is to create huge supermarket malls without telling us the goods on the shelf, are they coming from Kenyans, or are they coming from Egypt, or are they coming from China? And then you have a nice railway line, but again, you're not telling us, you know, the railway will be carrying goods from the coast to the country, but we don't see plans of goods that are supposed to be put on the railway line to the coast. That means that the cost of living will keep going up as long as we do not focus on increasing the productivity of Kenyans so that they can make the money they need to afford whatever goods.
But I still maintain, I mean, for me there's nothing wrong with the major long-term projects. James might not address himself to some basics. For example, in the city or urban areas, how long do we take in terms of movement, you know, just traffic flow? For example, Nairobi, Mombasa, and major cities. So my view, even of the SGR, for example, that's going to lessen the burden on our roads. And that also has a bit of implications, because you can be able to carry your hand cart, for example, you can be able to move your goods, but there's no space anymore, I mean, on our roads in terms of traffic. So there are good things with some of these mega projects. But I expected us to address the fundamentals. Look at the cost of kerosene. We've been able to put a tax that's more than 50%. Actually, what you pay today for fuel, a liter of fuel, is probably 70% government tax. So there's a major problem. You talk about government being an enabler. There's no way we enable production if tax is unreasonable. If you look at Article 201 on public finance management, it expects the constitution. Actually, someone talked about how expensive the constitution is. I think it's how expensive we are failing the constitution rather than how expensive the constitution is. Because the constitution wanted to provide checks and balances. Yeah. So in my view, taxation is a problem. Also, connection between political reform. Nobody should cheat you. that there is a country that has succeeded on economic reform without some sort of synchronize with political reform. So politicians must lead the process, but the politicians must be under check, and the only way is actually the constitution. So you are seeing Kenyans complain on Twitter, social media, but that's it. There's nothing more they can do.
But there are some people who argue that Asian countries, the Asian tigers, are not very democratic. I think they were at people with us in 1980. Now they are
Singapore, for example, up to 1976, we are on the
so democracy is not necessarily the thing.
Now that's the question. Like somebody would argue about Rwanda. Rwanda is doing very well.
Hold on. I think you talked about political reform. You didn't necessarily define the political
reform is that there must be certain leadership. If today I'm elected the president of this country, for example, His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, has a vision, an economic vision. Question is, have Kenyans understood his vision? Has he been able, has his technocrats at Treasury been able to implement his political vision vis-a-vis economic reform? And I think for us, that's where we lose it. Because we can never pretend that we can have a better economic reform without synchronizing with the people at State House.
I think, Udwak, the key point there is the tax. You know?
Because it sounds like you're agreeing.
On the tax part. That yes, you get which still goes back to the point. There's the tax, but the leakage. You know, we're taxing, but the money is not really going to the service that the citizen is expecting, and that's why there's a high cost of living. So the issue here is the corruption, the money that is collected on daily basis, and people are literally carrying it in sacks and taking it to their private bedrooms. Now, on the issue of traffic, you notice that it's still part of failure of service. If the government was to address itself to giving the individual citizen the security they require, people will be walking to the city center and back to their homes. But you notice that the reason why people are opting into little boxes called vehicles to where they work is a sense of security. You are in a box where you feel nobody will pinch your wallet, you know. But if the system was working to ensure that we don't have to have even security guards outside our homes. You notice in the entire city, every estate where you stay, you pay government tax to secure you, but at the same time, you pay a security guard, you know, to be guarding your home. Where you work the same, where you park your car, there's somebody else also taking 20 shillings from you to make sure the side mirror is not going.
These days they don't take 20.
You know, so basically for me it's the tax and the leakage of the same, because if it was not leaking and it was addressing itself to what it's supposed to do, then this discussion on cost of living might take a different direction.
You talked about production and manufacturing, which is not there, that we should manufacture things to export. When you look at us, Kenya is supposed to be ahead of East Africa. Yet you find we are buying clothes from Congo, you are buying shoes from Ethiopia, many shoes from Ethiopia. If you go to many shops, new shoes from Ethiopia, materials and clothes from the rest of East Africa, Tanzania, Congo. Manufacturing. Why, if, as he says, you have good vision, why are you not, this government, emphasizing on manufacturing so that you can export to the rest of East Africa, like we are getting from East Africa, or exporting to... Instead, we are buying matchboxes and toothpicks from China.
Nobody goes to business. Nobody, even Mama Mboga. Nobody goes to into business to make a loss. As it is so uncompetitive for the local businessman in this country. One, of course, the element of tax. Two, you know, the cost of doing business. You know, county government will come with all forms of taxes, not harmonized, surprises, and all those kind of things. Yeah. So that is why you'll be surprised that an egg can be flown from South Africa, gets into our supermarket, and is still cheaper than an egg that will have been produced probably in Kiambu. So the competitiveness. And if I was in government, I think the emphasis would have been, how do we reduce the cost of doing business? Because a consumer, there is no consumer without the market. So what the factors that operate around the market is what should actually interest the consumer. Because when you have low foreign direct investments coming in the country, is an indicator that something is not right. So political pronouncements, well, we are doing very well, but I think the question is, are we really doing very well in terms of being an enabler? Because, for example, when government does business, and I'll talk about the energy sector, should government be in business or should be a regulator? For example, when you have the pipelines and all those kind of businesses, I think somebody else in the private sector could possibly do better, twice as much in terms of profit, probably at half the cost.
James and Steve, I'm wondering, and allow me to wonder, are you people blaming the common man for the cost of living? I'm asking that because the government does not come from somewhere and place itself there. The common man puts the government in place. If you say the government is an enabler, it means the common man may have failed in putting the right government in place. So are you blaming the common man for the cost of living?
Maybe I could respond first by saying that I would say the common man is innocent in this picture. We are dealing with an inherited system post-colonial time. A system that was supposed to be sucking everything out and taking to the mother. An
extractive.
Yes. So then you get independence, then you have a government that now we have people in there that sucks it up for themselves. So the common man becomes a victim of a system that is not really keen on the production, which goes to Tegi's point, that when you have now this system that is supposed to be a sucking system, the politician becomes the driver of development. And the politician is in a hurry. They have only 5 years. So imagine in 5 years, if you want to showcase development, the kind of things you will do. You will engage in all manner of crazy things, and that leads to higher taxes, high cost of electricity, which then makes it difficult even for the factories that you'll be doing the shoes here to be able to do that. So what we need to be looking at is how to use our constitution to make the system not to be a system that sucks money from us, but a system that really enables us to have money in our pockets. And it's a similar scenario even at the county level. You notice that there's a high competition between the private sector and the county government, all struggling to do the same projects. If you look at milk cooling plants, there'll be individuals trying to come up as entrepreneurs for milk cooling plants to buy milk and supply to milk factories, but there'll be a county government putting another milk cooling plant just next to yours. You put up a hotel, there'll be a county government also saying they need to be having conference facilities next to. So you see that kind of competition that the government is trying to compete with the Kenyan talent makes it difficult then for our initial question of productivity and how it can bring to
point about the government reevaluating its role. And he gave the example of electricity. Should we be in there with tussling it out with other private producers, or should we be regulating? And so given the example you give of the county government and their hotels or whatever it is, should the governments not be facilitating and setting standards?
I think where we are, there's government and there's the person hiding behind government to do their own private business. So the issue really, as far as the Kenya government system is concerned, everything is on track in terms of paperwork. But now what we're looking at is the people who hide behind government and then do all these things in the name of government, when in essence they are actually suffocating
I think where I would beg to disagree with you is that both are guilty. You asked whether the public is innocent or not. I think both the government and the public are not innocent in this. Why do I say that? The tool that we've been looking for all this time is actually the law. If we operated within the law, and by the Article 1 of the Constitution says sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. It does not say. In fact, that power is actually donated to His Excellency the President, among others. So the issue of government does not even arise. And you forgive me talking from my background as a bit of activism. In another country, and I'm not trying to, of course, incite anybody, we would not be sitting, waiting for Parliament to award itself billions tomorrow. So what am I saying? There's a bit of complacence from the people. People seem to have given up. I've seen occasions when the late Cheche was the Minister for Transport. Because people made a little sacrifice, we were able to reform the public transport in this country. But on corruption, I think we fall very quickly into certain partisan issues and imagine that if it's Charles, oh, he's my brother, so it's not a big deal. And you've seen that happen. Even one of the parliamentary committees investigating one of the commission, the embedded commissions. So you see a problem where Kenyans seem to support corruption as long as it benefits them. But yet they're the first people to cry, you know, when it affects us all. So in my view, I think the responsibility lies in the citizens, first of all, getting the good government, and I would have no reason to imagine that the current government is not good. What I want to imagine is that the people are not doing their job of checking the government and making sure, you know, there's a provision for impeachment in this country. Do you know, is there any leader who has been impeached from an MCA, probably at the top? The answer is no. So what is the question? Then the politicians are right, we are wrong. That's what I would say for now.
You talked about the people crying, and so back to our viewers. Surely, if we don't build a railway line, how then do you attract production industries? Industries don't set up in unserviced deserts. Honestly, the railway is not only inward carriage, but outward as well. The cost of living has gone up. Cheche, observation, bottled water is expensive, more expensive than milk, and this is Kenya. John in West Pokot. These long-term projects are not productive. They do not create jobs. They only increase Wananchi's cost of living. Hi, James. Your theory is logical, but please talk of the practical current situation. The cost of living is unbearable, at least to the common man like me. Listening to James on the diversity of food reminds me of the eat rats and cockroaches talk. However, government seems less bothered on a production of food. Poor Malawi produces surplus maize for her citizen. That's Ombasa. What if infrastructure fails to ignite fast development, as in the case of China's ghost cities that people do not live in? And then, do you realize that all the people in your panel are government critics? Why not have a pro-government person?
Well, eat rats and cockroaches. I think it goes to the point of culture, because if you are really serious, and we have to have a proactive system that enables us to get all the foods competing. And I mean, it's just reason that you've had even discussions when it comes to food security, focus on indigenous foods, because initially we've always been thinking about the exotic foods, the wheats, the rices, and you know, the cabbages. So when I was talking about the diversity, of course, if there's a community that eats rats, they could also help us showcase on those possibilities. But really, the point being that we need a wider menu from where to choose from. And going back to the point that the railway line will be carrying goods from Kenya, I think we have not seen any proactive step that shows that we are preparing Kenyans to make use of this railway line to export. That one I've not seen. I've seen discussions about getting the port inland where possible, but you know, that does not tell us that you're carrying things outward. It's more about bringing items inward, and then to be, of course, on the issue of bring it on a realistic level. You know, it affects all of us. Although we are discussing, it's not that we live in the moon. We too are spending money, and the way it works with the cost of living for anybody who have salary, you notice all your relatives, they keep calling you as well. You pay tax to government, and then you also support your relatives. And there's no even no tax relief for working people, where the government says if you support 10 people, we can allow you to go home with this extra amount of money. We take care of our old parents at home. The government is supposed to have a program for this, but again, so it's like the Kenyan is faced with a scenario where he's taxed, you know, around the clock. So that really also contributes to the cost of living. For the citizen, why I still feel that the common Mwananchi is innocent is that we've not cultivated the productivity culture. We've cultivated the culture of the politician knows it all. The politician is the one who will address your problem. But imagine if we flipped that to nobody knocks the politician's door to ask for school fees, because we've created a system where we can make that school fees. So by making the politician to be the solution giver for everything that affects common mwananchi, then the mwananchi is trapped. So he's a victim in my view. He's not really part of the problem.
But what about this power that Mwananchi has, that Mr. Mutoro talks about? You have a constitution. You can go out onto the streets. You can impeach people all the way from MCA up to president.
But remember Egypt. Remember the Arab Spring. You know, that power tends to be really, what I would say, it bursts and then cools down. When you're talking about long term, you have to have a citizen that have something to lose. You know, like the way you see companies fighting to protect their copyright. So if a citizen is a producer of vegetables, and suddenly somebody starts bringing vegetables to the market, they'll have the reason to be on the street every day to say, you're entering our turf. If you destroy it, where will we go?
Does that mean it's still not so bad for the common Kenyan, and that's why we have not really seen a true revolution?
I think first what I'm addressing myself to is that there has to be something just beyond the point that I have the right. There has to be something where I feel if I lose it, my life is gone. And that, in most cases, if you've seen even in Europe, the farmers that produce milk, you touch their milk, they'll be pouring milk all over the streets of France, and there'll be no business.
But you have seen people throwing tea on the roadside.
Charles, I think for me,
that's the kind of momentum I'm talking about, that if we orient...
Uprooting coffee plantation.
People have uprooted coffee, they have thrown tea on the roadside.
I think
that's the kind of citizen I'm looking.
I think focusing back to the people is that, you know, politics is also part of what we consume. And talk about consumer. I think the problem in this country is that we have left the politician to define the national agenda, the debate, such that a whole country, you know, with a lot of problems, will be treated to discussing a certificate of probably a politician. You know, and I think there are many more problems. And for me, of course, I appreciate my good friends in the media, but I think on this occasion, the media is also guilty. Why? Because the media focuses national debate. The time we have a headline on a certain issue, by the focus of the country goes to that. So we are actually orienting the country to consuming bad politics. We have possibly very little time for that revolutionist in a certain village somewhere who's trying to probably have a model in terms of productivity and all those kind of issues. So I would think, of course, media is commercial. They have their own interests, but I would think they would play a fundamental role in trying to reform this kind of a process.
I'll come back to you on this revolution, because I'm sure that the people who are in power and who are listening will be very uncomfortable hearing that term. But when you talk about the media, yes, you know, commercial interests, yes, like Royal Media, which is commercial, but we also have public service interests. And would you not accept that if the public is to blame, which is, you know, it's because, you know, they're fine, as you said, with the status quo. That we benefit in certain instances, because if, as you said, if Mutegi is my friend or my brother and he is corrupt, I know that some of that corruption is going to help me look after the 10 people, you know, I am looking after, because remember, I'm taxed around the clock. And it's easier for you to steal than for all of us to join hands, you know, and, you know, overhaul the system. Not overthrow, but overhaul.
But do Kenyans shun corruption? If you look at people who have done major scams, Golden Bag, National Youth Service, they have gone to politics and get elected.
I think that's not a fair question. I think the question should be, why would Kenyans need corruption to enjoy the proceeds of corruption? Is that a number of them are desperate. By the way, even the poor people, the poorest of the poor, nobody will take poison in terms of probably alcohol or anything, knowing that's poison. People don't, Kenyans by on average are very resilient, hard-working people.
4 weeks ago, that woman on in the media was consuming a poisonous herb, knowing very well it's poisonous, and that's why she took her time and boiled it for 15 hours.
Yes.
She knows it's poisonous and she's taking it because she has no option.
And she's trying to make it better by the boiling. So the point I wanted to say, for example, something happened in this country a couple of weeks ago, and you know, in another country it will be a big thing, particularly for us in civil society. Government came up and brought up an agency for advertising and said by the stock of that action, we actually killed a lot of accountability and transparency, because what I'm seeing is there's an insert in some dailies and it has implications. Therefore, I would like to use this program to say we are actively contemplating taking legal action, because our interest, our interest is not about how much media will make from it. Our interest is that we will be able to have a problem where media might, and we are using the word might, cowed into not probably giving accountability and transparency. So what is happening in the government all along is that we are going to some sort of dark days, but again in a very professional way. How many people knew about that kind of a development? And it's happening. I'll talk for myself. Anytime I see that particular insert, by the way, I just put it aside and proceed with the normal pages of the paper. Because, you know, I really have no business. I'm not looking for a tender in government and that kind of thing. In the process, I'll miss. But you see, during those old days where I'll look for news on any page, I could actually stumble upon the government advertisement. So there are certain things that happen in this country that we are not paying attention to. But we would rather pay attention, you know, to a certificate of a certain individual, which of course can be dealt quietly, you know, like any other crime, if there's a crime. So I will still go back and say we have lost the main focus as a country, particularly on rebuilding our economy.
You're frustrated with the focus, the attention that the certificate of the Mombasa governor, his school leaving certificate, and how he was able to advance his education. Okay, James?
I'm going back to my point of productivity. You notice that even what motivates government officers to create stuff like what my friend Stephen is talking about would be an avenue to eat. And now to take its question, so why would Kenyans be very happy and love corruption? Is again the point that we have a culture where we think success is the only thing that we need to have. And so the shortcut success being the much I steal and show that I have this and that.
Actually, the more money I have,
and then people
regardless
say
of how
I'm
I get
successful. But when you look at countries such as United States of America, they celebrate failure. Some of the most famous people would be people who talk about their failures. I failed this way, failed that way, and I'm here. And you know why failure becomes an issue to celebrate? It's because it's a productivity culture. If you're producing something, you'll fail one way or the other as you keep going. But now, if you're in a culture where we've been tuned to, you have just to be successful. Get A if it's in school. Everybody's told unless you get A, you're a failure.
By any means.
Yes, then of course, and then Matiang'i comes along, and then of course, then you have the success of now. If you have a job, how do you define your success? Do you have a big car? Do you have a big house? Then that then breeds the culture and appreciation of corruption.
Can I put one sentence?
I like just to buttress my point of productivity. Is a missing element, as we also look at the leakage that is rampant in our government system.
My one sentence to respond to that kind of thing: as long as we continue rewarding impunity, because there's an animal in this country called impunity, and by the way, seems to have encroached through all arms of government. And of course the people are also, as I said, they are not innocent. So as long as there's impunity, it means that we are not going to live by the rule of law. What does that mean? James, you go until Jesus comes back. We'll continue to talk about productivity, but as long as there's impunity, meaning I can take away what belongs to you, and then I'm not punished, there will be no production. In fact, it will be a waste of time talking about productivity. So I'll still go back to the rule of law, and then focus. national. Where should our energies be going to as a country? I think our energies, we should stop talking about personalities, from politicians. And even if we talk about personalities, we talk about a few people. We don't even talk across board. So I think we should actually move to issues as a country. The day we stop talking about entertaining impunity or rewarding it. Because, like, for example, in politics, if you have to have helicopters, for example, there's a bit of excitement. Nobody would want to know where the helicopter is coming from, than somebody walking barefoot, looking to be a governor or an MCA. Probably people will think the person is crazy, So basically that.
Okay, so we have to take a break now, but I will say to the viewer who accused us of piling our panel today with government critics, government supporters declined to come on the show ahead of the budget reading tomorrow. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. Talk to us on SMS number 22422 or on Twitter using the hashtag Cheche.